I'm divorcing you. I've already sold the beach house, and I'm starting over with my trainer." She laughed on the other end of the line, the kind of laugh that's meant to sting, as if she'd been waiting for this moment of revelation. I kept my voice steady, refusing to give her the satisfaction of rattling me. "I get it," I said, though the words fell heavier than I expected. "My name's George Whitaker. I'm 52 years old, which doesn't sound old until you're standing at the edge of starting over. I've spent the last 23 years immersed in commercial property deals out of Jacksonville, Florida, a career built on patience, precision, and the art of reading between the lines. I can spot a loophole in a contract faster than most people notice a typo, and that obsessive attention to detail has made me good at what I do. It's funny, though, when it came to my marriage, I was blind to the cracks, or maybe just too tired to look for them. I scrutinized every inch of office leases and warehouse titles, but I never bothered to watch for the silent signals at home, not until it was almost pointless. The call came on a Thursday morning, the kind of gray, drizzling day that makes European cities feel even farther from home. I was sitting in a Brussels hotel suite, finishing up an industrial warehouse deal for an American shipping company that wanted a European foothold. 4 days into the trip, 6,000 miles away, and Vanessa decided this was a moment to officially end our 15-year marriage. Maybe the distance made it easier for her, or maybe she just wanted to get over with before I set foot in the house again. "Kyle and I need a fresh start," she said, her tone almost rehearsed, too smooth. I could picture her standing in our kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, already imagining her new life. It was the same voice I'd heard from half the men in my office, the same story. Confident, determined, already out the door. The beach house sold for a good price. I've already signed. The buyer was moving in next week, she said. She sounded almost proud, as if she'd scored a major victory. Kyle Bennett, her trainer for the past year and a half, had apparently been waiting in the wings. He was 35, all muscle and Instagram grins, drove a flashy car that screamed lease rather than ownership, and once asked me dead serious how much my watch cost. I remember thinking back then that it was an odd question for a man to ask another man in his own home. I didn't raise my voice, didn't slam my fist down or beg or even flinch. I just asked, "When did you close the sale?" She hesitated a beat, maybe surprised I wasn't falling apart. "Yesterday," she said. I could hear the anticipation in her voice. She wanted drama. She expected the argument, the explosion, but I gave her nothing. "Buyer's moving in next week. I figured you wouldn't mind staying at the Marriott when you get back, since you're always traveling anyway." She said it like it was a kindness, as if she was doing me a favor. After we hung up, I sat at the desk for almost an hour, staring out at the wet Brussels skyline. Rain streaked the windows, and I watched people below scurry for cover, umbrellas blossoming like dark flowers. I thought about how 15 years could dissolve into a phone call. I wondered if she'd planned it this way, waiting until I was far away, so she wouldn't have to see the look on my face. She thought I'd just accept it, that I'd nod and move on, as if I spent my life going along with whatever she decided. She never really knew me, not in the ways that matter. She didn't know that years of negotiation had taught me to spot an angle, to protect what's mine. She didn't know that for months. My gut had been screaming that something was off, and I'd already started preparing for fallout, quietly, methodically, the way I do everything. 16 years ago, I met Vanessa Sanders at a real estate conference in Orlando. She stood out, sharp, quick-witted, dressed for success, with a gleam in her eye that hinted at ambition and hunger. She worked for a high-end property management firm, and she had a way of making everyone in the room notice her, even if she barely said a word. I liked that about her. I liked how she could take control of a conversation, how she didn't flinch when someone tried to talk over her. Within a year, we were married at the courthouse, her sister and my brother witnesses to a ceremony that felt both rushed and inevitable. We were both too impatient to bother with a big wedding. For a while, that impatience felt like a shared strength. 3 years later, we bought the beach house on Amelia Island. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, wraparound deck with an uninterrupted line to the horizon. $1.2 million, almost my entire savings, and a mortgage that made me sweat at night. I spent weekends with a drill and a hammer, coaxing the place back to life, replacing rotten deck boards, fixing up the kitchen, patching weathered siding. Vanessa was in her element, transforming rooms with paint swatches and catalogs, hosting dinner parties that never ended before midnight. For a decade, the house was our anchor, the place we came back to after every business trip, every family holiday that went sideways. "This is our forever place," she said that first night, glass of wine raised, eyes shining. I wanted to believe her, and for a while I did. She left her job in property management to start her own interior design business, poured herself into building something from scratch. It was a thrill to watch her succeed, to see her name on the side of a van, to watch her charm clients and vendors alike. Sometimes she'd come with me on overseas trips. Paris, Barcelona, Tokyo. We'd string business and pleasure together, let the days blur into nights. I thought we were happy. I thought we understood each other. But 2 years ago, I started noticing the cracks. They were small at first, barely worth mentioning. She stopped asking about my projects, stopped caring about the details that used to fascinate her. She didn't want to travel anymore. Her texts got shorter, more abrupt. "Have a good meeting. Safe travels. Gone were the "I miss yous," the "can't wait until you get home." She joined a gym, started training with Kyle, who was everything I wasn't: young, energetic, always on display. I encouraged her, thinking it was a phase. But then the credit card bills arrived, full of dinners I'd never heard about, spa weekends with friends whose faces I couldn't place. She was living a life that didn't include me, and she seemed to prefer it that way. I could have confronted her, hired a PI, started snooping. Some of my friends told me to track her phone, to catch her in the act. But I didn't. Instead, I watched, silently collecting details, cataloging every change. I started making plans, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. 11 months ago, when things felt especially shaky, I put the beach house into a living trust. I'd been thinking about it for months, weighing the options. I slipped the paperwork in with the refinancing documents for our Tampa investment property, and Vanessa signed without reading, too occupied with her phone to care. "It protects us both," I told her, and she nodded, barely listening. It was only half a lie. The trust did offer protection, just not the kind she imagined. I never brought up again. I let her drift, let her make her choices, let her believe she was in control. Now, sitting thousands of miles away, the rain tapping at the window like a metronome, I realized how little she ever understood me. She saw me as passive, predictable, the kind of man who could be managed. But she forgot. When you spend your life in negotiation, you never leave your future to chance. And when your instincts tell you the ground is shifting, you prepare, quietly and thoroughly, for whatever comes next. After I fired off an email to my attorney from my hotel suite in Brussels, a room that felt far too opulent for the mood settling over me, I snapped my laptop shut, the click echoing in the quiet, and reached for the property deed tucked away in my briefcase. I'd started carrying it with me everywhere, an old reflex from my earliest days in law, when I learned the hard way that trust was a rare commodity and a missing document could spell disaster. Once, I watched a client nearly lose everything because a rival claimed the paperwork was forged. I swore then I'd never be caught off guard. Now the deed was my shield. It spelled out in black and white that the Amelia Island house was safely nestled inside the George Whitaker Living Trust, and I was its sole trustee. Everything was airtight. Vanessa had no legal grounds to sell it, not even a sliver of a right. It was almost laughable, really. The same woman who used to roll her eyes at me for double-checking every signature and initial who used to tease, "Life's too short for fine print, George," as I pored over contracts late into the night. Yet here I was, saved, quite literally, by the same fine print she'd always dismissed. Stepping out into the cobblestone hard Grand Place, I dialed Brian, my oldest friend, and the only attorney I trusted implicitly. The square thrummed with tourists and locals, their chatter blending with the distant clang of tram bells. But my focus was razor sharp. "She can't sell what she doesn't own," I told him, keeping my voice low as I navigated the crowd. He didn't even pause. "Any attempted sale is void, George. Fraudulent, plain and simple." The buyers have no claim, and if Vanessa pushes, she's treading into criminal territory. There was a gravity in his tone, but he didn't need to remind me of the stakes. I knew them already. And yet, even with every justification to go scorched earth, to let the law chew her up and spit her out, I couldn't bring myself to want that for her. Not after years together. Not even after betrayal. I just wanted to protect what was mine, to draw a line clear and unyielding. Brian, always thorough, reassured me that he'd already flagged the property with the county recorder's office. No transfer would pass without scrutiny. He'd even looped in every local title company, ensuring no one could claim ignorance. "This sale isn't happening, George," he said, his confidence a lifeline. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. For the first time in days, I felt the ground return beneath my feet. After we hung up, I wandered aimlessly until I found a tiny cafe tucked away from the main square, its tables shaded by striped umbrellas. I ordered a coffee and sat for hours, watching the world drift by in slow, sun-drenched fragments. I wasn't angry, not anymore. If anything, a strange clarity had settled in. The real wound wasn't Vanessa's infidelity or even her attempt to steal our home. It was the cavalier way she'd done it, the casual tone of her voice when she'd told me, as if my shock and pain were nothing more than background noise, an inconvenience to be brushed aside. Our years together, our shared history, reduced to a footnote in her next chapter. I thumbed out a message to my Brussels client, citing a family emergency, and booked the first flight home to Florida. On the 9-hour journey, I didn't bother with work or distractions. I just sat, letting the hum of the engines and the darkness outside wash over me. My mind traced over every deal I'd ever closed, every negotiation where I'd bent the rules but never broken them. Now, it was my turn to use that same precision to defend myself. I realized then that it wasn't vengeance I wanted, or even justice. I just wanted fairness. To live in a world where the rules meant something, where trust and signatures still held weight. By the time we touched down in Jacksonville, my resolve was set. There would be no confrontation, no pleading, no attempt to patch what was already broken. I'd simply hold Vanessa to the contract she'd signed and never cared to read. In the end, the law didn't care about hurt feelings, only about what was on paper. I didn't call ahead. Instead, I rented a car and drove the familiar route to Amelia Island, the flat Florida landscape rushing past as I rehearsed what I'd say. The house came into view just after noon on Saturday, sunlight glinting off its white stucco and pale blue shutters. But parked in my usual spot was a sleek black Mercedes convertible, an unfamiliar intrusion. Kyle's, I guessed. The replacement, or maybe just the latest distraction. The front door was unlocked, the kind of careless oversight that would have driven me crazy once. From the hallway, I heard Vanessa's laughter, bright and easy, as though nothing was amiss, mingling with Man's voice discussing renovations. The wall between the living room and dining room should come down first, he was saying, his tone confident. Open concept is everything in beach properties. For a moment, I just listened, taking in the scene. Vanessa stood at the kitchen island, radiant in a sundress I'd never seen, holding a glass of champagne as if this was just another Saturday. Kyle hovered beside her, his arm around her waist, gesturing at floor plans on his tablet. They looked like a couple planning a future, oblivious to the storm about to hit. Their laughter faded as I set my suitcase down and stepped into the room. Vanessa's smile faltered, her eyes flicking to the documents in my hand before she caught herself and straightened. "George," she said, forcing a lightness into her voice that didn't quite ring true. "I didn't expect you back until Monday." "Clearly," I replied, my gaze lingering on Kyle, who dropped his arm from her waist, suddenly awkward. Kyle gave a nervous, almost embarrassed chuckle. "Well, this is awkward. Maybe I should go." "Actually," I said evenly, "I'd prefer if you stayed. I think you'll want to hear this." Vanessa's face hardened, her posture stiffening as she tried to regain control. "Let's not do this, George. There's no need to make things ugly. I've been unhappy for a long time. We both have. Isn't it better if we just move on?" I nodded, keeping my tone even, letting the weight of what I knew settle in the room. I agree that we both deserve a fresh start. which is why I've already spoken to my attorney about the fraudulent sale you attempted. Her composure cracked, a flicker of panic passing over her features. What are you talking about? She asked, but her voice was thin. I set my briefcase on the island and slowly drew out the trust documents and the property deed, laying them out with deliberate care. The house isn't yours to sell, Vanessa. It hasn't been for nearly a year. You signed the transfer into the trust last May. Do you remember? Everything is in my name, legally and irrevocably. Kyle's confusion was plain. He turned to Vanessa, searching her face. You told me the sale was already done, that we could start making plans. She shook her head, clinging to her story even as it unraveled. It was Kyle. Everything's fine. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake, I said quietly, my voice cutting through the denial. Look at the deed. Everything is right here. The property belongs to the George Whitaker Living Trust. You both can check with the county, with any title company in the state. Any attempt to sell or transfer is fraud, and I have every document to prove it. The room fell silent, except for the distant crash of waves. The illusion of normalcy shattered. Vanessa stared at the papers, her face pale, her bravado gone. Kyle looked at her, then at me, realization dawning that their plans were built on sand. For a moment, none of us spoke. I let the silence stretch, knowing the truth had finally landed. I wasn't angry anymore, just resolute. I'd spent years honoring my promises, believing in the sanctity of agreements. Now, I'd hold Vanessa to hers. In the end, contracts don't care about love or loss. They just require a signature. And that, I thought, was what would finally set me free. Remember those refinancing documents you didn't bother to read? The moment I brought them up, Vanessa's hand shot out, snatching the stack from me, her eyes darting across the pages, as if she could will a loophole into existence. There was a trembling disbelief in her voice when she whispered, "This can't be real." I didn't flinch. I'd expected this moment, braced for it. Not only is it real, it's binding. The sale you try to push through, dead in the water. The buyer already knows. All bets are off. The words seemed to echo in the kitchen. I watched Kyle's confidence deflate in real time, as if he'd been exposed to a chill he couldn't shake. "I'll wait in the car," he muttered. And before I could respond, he slipped out, eager to avoid the fallout. Once the door shut behind him, the air thickened. Vanessa's shock curdled quickly into accusation. "You tricked me," she spat, eyes narrowed, seeking an advantage she no longer had. I just shrugged, keeping my tone flat. "No, Vanessa, I protected what's mine. That's standard in my business. You sign what you didn't bother to read. That's not a trick. That's negligence. You know that as well as I do." She tried to soften, turning on that voice she used when she wanted something. "George, let's be reasonable. We can split whatever comes from the sale. There's no need to make this any uglier with lawyers." I shook my head, resolute. Too late for that. The lawyers are already involved. Mine, the buyers. They're furious about almost buying a house from someone with no legal right to sell it. They're reviewing their options now. She stared, all her bravado gone, her voice barely audible. "You wouldn't actually go through with this." I met her gaze, unyielding. "I'm not doing anything except enforcing my rights. What happens next is in your hands." For a moment, I saw her weighing her next move, calculating and desperate. Then her jaw set. She snatched her phone off the counter, her hand shaking just enough to betray her. "I'm calling my sister's lawyer. You can't get away with this." I didn't bother to argue. "That's probably wise. You should talk to a lawyer. I'll be at the Hilton downtown tonight, giving you some space to think. But let's be absolutely clear. The house isn't for sale, and I'm moving back in on Monday." As I turned to leave, Vanessa's voice cut through the silence, sharp and wounded. "This isn't over, George." I paused at the doorway, looking back at her, standing in the kitchen we'd remodeled together, clutching a champagne flute that suddenly seemed out of place. "Actually, Vanessa, I think it is." Sunday morning, I found myself in Brian's office. The building was nearly deserted, the usual bustle of assistants and ringing phones replaced by a hush that made the stakes feel even higher. Brian looked like he hadn't slept, a a man who'd spent the night wrestling with the facts instead of dreaming. He greeted me with a nod, skipping any pretense of small talk, and immediately spread out a series of documents across his desk, each neatly tabbed and annotated. "There's more to this than we thought," he said, pushing a folder toward me. "My investigator dug deeper after you called. You need to see this." I opened the folder, and a wave of anxiety hit me as I scanned the contents. Bank statements, credit card transactions, property record with signatures I didn't recognize. "Vanessa's been busy," Brian continued, his voice grim. "She opened a separate account last year. Transferred about $170,000 out of your joint savings over the last 12 months, bit by bit, so you wouldn't notice." The number hit me like a physical blow. Most of our emergency fund, gone, siphoned away without a word. "And this," he said, sliding over another set of documents. It was preliminary paperwork for a retail space in Savannah. Leases, permits, all in Vanessa's name and Kyle Bennett's. They'd signed to open a fitness boutique 3 months ago, long before she told me she wanted out. I sat back, feeling the pieces fit together with a sickening clarity. This wasn't just an impulsive affair or a marriage falling apart at the seams. It was a calculated plan, months or maybe years in the making. "The timing lines up," I muttered, my voice hollow. She wasn't just trying to cash out in the divorce. She was raising capital for their business. Brian nodded. "It gets worse. The buyer for your beach house turns out it's a shell company. The real owner is Kyle's brother, Jason Bennett. They were going to buy the house cheap, wait for you to realize what happened, and then flip it for a profit once you were desperate to negotiate." His words hung in the air, heavy and damning. Suddenly, every moment from the past year made sense. The late nights, the sudden interest in finances, the secrecy. This wasn't just about love lost. It was about betrayal, manipulation, and greed. Something inside me hardened, the initial numbness giving way to a cold, focused anger. This wasn't merely about protecting what was mine anymore. It was about making sure there were consequences for what she'd done. Were my options? I asked, my voice steady, though my hands trembled slightly. Brian leaned back, considering. "Legally, you're on solid ground. The way you set up the trust shields a house. We'll have your joint accounts frozen immediately, so she can't drain any more funds. The money she already took is trickier. Florida's equitable distribution laws mean she could argue it's a share, but the attempted fraud, selling property she didn't own, gives us leverage. That's potentially criminal, fraud, maybe even grand theft, but I doubt you want her prosecuted." He was right. As much as I wanted justice, I didn't want to see Vanessa in handcuffs. I wanted a clean break, not a spectacle. Brian seemed to sense my conflict. "Here's my proposal," he said, pulling out a draft agreement. "A divorce settlement that's fair, but tough. She returns 60% of what she took from the joint savings. She gives up any claim to the beach house. No arguments, no loopholes. In return, you waive any claim to her new business. No criminal charges, no messy court battles. A clean cut for both of you." I weighed the offer, the reality of it settling in, and if she refuses? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Brian's expression grew hard. "Then we pursue every legal option, civil, even criminal if we have to. But let's give her the chance to settle this quietly. If she's smart, she'll see it's the best deal she's going to get." As I left Brian's office, the city outside felt different, emptier, colder. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from Vanessa. No doubt the first volley in another round of negotiations and accusations. I paused, looking back through the glass doors at Brian, who was already on the phone, orchestrating the next moves. Whatever happened next, I knew I'd done everything I could to reclaim my life. And this time, I wouldn't be blindsided. My lawyer scoffed. "You're bluffing. The house is joint property, trust or no trust. See you in court." I forwarded Brian a message, watching the 3 dots as he typed. He just shook his head when he called. "She's getting bad advice, George. The trust is airtight, ironclad. Her lawyer's either green or grasping at straws." That was all I needed to hear. I told Brian to send over the settlement offer, but not to let his guard down. I had a feeling Vanessa would dig in her heels. Logic had never swayed her once pride got involved. That Sunday blurred past in the stale quiet of my hotel room. I stacked old tax returns and property deeds in neat piles, tracing the messy web of our finances. The deeper I dug, the more I found. Hidden credit cards, secret Venmo transfers to her sister, the little games Vanessa played behind my back. Each discovery was a jolt, a reminder that this wasn't just about a house or even the money. It was about the years I spent building a life, inch by inch, only to find someone chipping away at the foundation when I wasn't looking. This fight had become about reclaiming my own story, proving to myself that what I built couldn't just be stolen by sleight of hand. Monday morning, I checked out of the hotel, the lobby coffee bitter on my tongue. By the time I reached the courthouse, Brian had already filed a divorce petition and an emergency motion to freeze our property. We stood in the echoing hallway as the clerk stamped the forms. By 10 a.m., Vanessa's options had shrunk to a box. The house, trust or no trust, was locked down tight. She couldn't sell, transfer, or even so much as refinance. The relief was sharp, almost painful, like air rushing into lungs after holding my breath too long. Next, I headed to First Coast Bank, parking beside the same curb where I'd hammered out real estate deals a decade ago. Thomas Parker, the branch manager, greeted me with a handshake that lingered just a second too long. He remembered me from the old days, before everything got complicated. In less than an hour, we untangled my finances from Vanessa's. Separate checking, new passwords, every joint account split or closed. Anything else, George? Thomas asked as we finished. Yeah, when's the next payment to Elite Fitness? He clicked through the screen. Tomorrow. $300. Been going out every month for 18 months. Cancel it, I said, and stop anything else automatic, except utilities for the beach house. He nodded, a silent ally in my campaign to reclaim my life. By noon, I'd changed my credit cards, called HR to update my marital status, talked to the insurance agent about switching policies. With every phone call, every signature, I was peeling off the layers that bound us together for 15 years. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing Vanessa, her sister, numbers I didn't recognize, one of them her lawyer, I guess. I let every call go to voicemail. I had nothing left to say that I hadn't already put in writing. After a quick lunch, I drove out to Beach House, a place that, until recently, had felt like the last bit of peace I owned. Vanessa's car was gone, but the silver Mercedes, Kyle's, sat in the driveway, arrogance on 4 wheels. I unlocked the door, half expecting to find the locks changed or the place ransacked. Instead, everything was just as I'd left it. The scent of salt air, the echo of old laughter in the hallways. In the living room, Kyle was hunched over the couch, shoving clothes into a duffel bag. He looked up, eyes wide, caught in the act. I was just grabbing my stuff, he stammered, trying to sound casual, but his hands trembled. I stood in the doorway, watching him, saying nothing. Look, man, he said, squirming. None of this was personal. Vanessa told me you guys were done long before I came along. I kept my voice calm. Where is she? At her sister's. She's upset. Says you're trying to ruin her. The absurdity almost made me laugh. Even now, Vanessa was spinning stories, casting herself as a victim. That what she told you? That I'm the villain in all this? He looked away. She said you were controlling, that you kept her trapped here while you were off traveling. I let the accusation hang in the air. And the business you two planned to start with the money from selling my house? Was that my doing too? His face registered shock, so he hadn't expected me to know. I pressed on. Tell Vanessa her settlement offer is ready at Brian Eldridge's office. She's got 48 hours to accept. If she stalls, we go to court, and there'll be fraud charges on the table. Fraud. His bravado collapsed. What do you mean? Trying to sell property she doesn't own. Planning to use money that isn't hers. Take your pick. He grabbed his bag, edging toward the door, desperate to escape the consequences closing in. One more thing, I said before he left. The buyer, Jason Bennett, your brother, right? Tell him if he wants to avoid being named in the fraud investigation. He needs to withdraw his offer by the end of the day. Kyle didn't argue. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes was all the answer I needed. Less than an hour later, Brian called to confirm it. Jason Bennett had already withdrawn the offer. The dominoes were falling, and I hadn't even had to push. That night, I changed the locks myself, the click of each deadbolt like a final punctuation mark. I shut down the old security system. Too many people knew the codes, and spent an hour setting up new cameras, new passwords, new barriers. For dinner, I ordered takeout from the seafood place Vanessa and I used to love, eating alone on the deck as dusk settled over the waves. The ocean kept rolling in, indifferent to our drama, a reminder that some things endure no matter how much the world changes. Tomorrow, there will be more legal battles, more angry voicemails, more layers to peel back from the life we'd built together. But here in my own house, protected and alone, I felt something settle inside me. Not happiness. Not yet. No one is happy at the end of a marriage. Not really. But a quiet certainty, deep and unmoving. I had stood my ground. I had refused to be erased. 3 weeks later, I found myself across from Vanessa in Brian's conference room. The walls lined with degrees and framed verdicts. Her new lawyer, a young guy in a suit that was probably worth more than his car, shuffled his papers, trying to project confidence he didn't quite feel. Vanessa sat stone-faced, her eyes fixed on a spot just above my shoulder, as if she could will herself to be anywhere else but here. She hadn't spoken to me since that last encounter in the kitchen, and now, with everything on the line, the silence between us felt heavier than any accusation. The battle was nearly over, but the scars would take much longer to fade. She'd only ever made contact by way of escalating legal threats, each letter a little more frantic, each allegation a little more far-fetched than the last. Brian, methodical as always, dismantled her claims with clinical precision. Every brief, every motion, a step closer to unraveling the web she'd spun. Today was supposed to be a pre-trial hearing, but honestly, no one believed it would reach that point. The evidence was overwhelming, suffocating any glimmer of hope she might have clung to. "Before we begin," Brian said, voice smooth and steady, "I'd like these entered into the record." He slid 3 documents across the Warren conference table. The original trust deed, a stack of bank records showing Vanessa's systematic withdrawals over the past 2 years, and most damning of all, a signed affidavit from Jason Bennett. In it, Jason laid out the entire fraudulent property scheme in meticulous detail, implicating Vanessa and tracing every dollar. Vanessa's lawyer scanned the affidavit, his composure faltering as his eyes darted across the damning lines. He leaned over and whispered urgently to Vanessa, whose posture stiffened even further. For a moment, I caught her gaze. There was fear there, but more than that, resignation. She understood this was the end of the fight. "We're prepared to settle," her lawyer finally said, voice barely above a murmur after their hurried whisper exchange. Brian didn't gloat. He simply nodded, calm as if discussing the weather. "Our terms are straightforward. Vanessa returns $100,000. She relinquishes any and all claims to the beach house and the other trust properties. In exchange, George waives any right to her new business and agrees not to pursue criminal charges." Vanessa sat in silence for the first time that day, her fingers curling around the edge of the table. "And if I refuse?" she said, her voice brittle, almost defiant. Brian looked directly at her, unblinking. "Then we take this evidence to the district attorney," he replied, his tone matter-of-fact but utterly unforgiving. "Fraud in excess of $100,000 carries serious consequences in Florida. You know that." Her attorney placed a gentle but urgent hand on her arm. "We need a moment," he said, and they left the room, tension trailing behind them. 17 long minutes crawled by. I stared out the window, watching the courthouse staff bustle past. When Vanessa and her lawyer returned, she avoided my eyes entirely, her expression hollowed out by the weight of what she'd lost. "We accept," her lawyer said quietly. There was nothing left to say. No satisfaction, no sense of triumph. I simply signed where Brian indicated, my hand steady, and watched as Vanessa scrawled her own signature beside mine. After 15 years, tax returns, greeting cards, share holidays. Her handwriting was as familiar to me as my own. Now it was a final mark on the last page of our story. And just like that, it was over. 6 months later, I found myself standing on the deck of the beach house, a mug of coffee warm in my hands as the first light of dawn spilled across the Atlantic. The house felt transformed, not just in the obvious ways. I gutted the kitchen, replaced the battered siding with hurricane-resistant materials, installed impact windows in every room. Each improvement was more than cosmetic. It was a deliberate act of reclaiming, a way of anchoring myself in this new life. Renovations became a ritual, a steadying force in the aftermath of so much upheaval. The place, for so long a battleground, finally belonged to me. Word filtered back, as it always does in small circles, that Vanessa and Kyle had eventually opened their long-planned fitness studio in Savannah, though on a much smaller scale than they'd once boasted about. Business, I heard, was slow. A handful of clients, a trickle of revenue. I didn't feel vindicated or pleased. If anything, there was a dull ache, a sense of loss, not just for what Vanessa and I had shared, but for the future we'd once imagined together. It was hard not to wonder how things might have played out if trust hadn't frayed, if choices had been different. The divorce was finalized 3 months ago. The paperwork as clinical and emotionless as a settlement. No more last-minute emails. No dramatic confrontations. Vanessa returned the money as agreed, and I invested it in a modest office building downtown. It wasn't flashy, but the tenants paid on time, and the steady income felt like a small but meaningful victory, a foundation to build on, slowly and carefully. One morning, my phone rang as I watched Pelican skim the waves. Monica Harrison, my title agent and friend, was on the other end. "Just checking in," she said, her voice bright and familiar. "How's the beach house treating you?" "Better every day," I told her, glancing around at the subtle changes. The echoes of the past still lingered, but they grew fainter with each passing week. "Thanks again for everything you did with the trust." "That's what friends are for," Monica replied. There was a brief pause. "Actually, I came across another property you might be interested in. Commercial, good location, solid tenants. Similar deal to your office building." "Send it over," I said, feeling a flicker of genuine interest. I'm open to new projects. After we hung up, I lingered on the deck a while longer. The ocean was relentless in its rhythm, wave after wave, indifferent to the dramas and heartbreaks that played out on shore. There was comfort in that predictability, in the idea that some things move forward no matter what. You can't bend the tide to your will, can't cheat it or steal its momentum. All you can do is adapt, rebuild, and keep going. I finished my coffee and went inside to get ready for work, sunlight filtering through the new windows. The house was still just wood and glass and concrete, but it was more than that now. It was a clean slate, a place where the past could finally rest. I didn't need more than that, not victory, not justice, not even closure. Just a place to stand, secure and unencumbered, as the world kept turning. And honestly, that was enough.